Okay, so today's video is going to be on calorie and carb cycling. So we've already covered how to work out calories and applying them for whatever your goal is. And then we've already gone into some detail about macros. So now what you can look at is ways to manipulate what needs to be done to make it fit around your lifestyle a little bit better. So the problem a lot of people have is they tend to overly restrict said calories that we've worked out that would be your deficit, for example, overly restrict it, up the activity way more than they would normally, and then all it ends up creating is this inability to sustain that long term. Then when you throw into the mix stuff like, I've got a social engagement on the weekend and unable to keep to those calories that you've created 7 days a week, then what that does is it just makes it easier for you to fall off the wagon. And by falling off the wagon, you tend to feel that guilt. You feel the guilt, you go to a binge restrict cycle. And then what you tend to do is restrict all week, binge on the weekend, fuck up your deficit or, your progress. And then you end up just going through the same cycle each week and not getting anywhere. Now, if you were to actually plan ahead a bit and actually work out what needs to be done to still achieve it, I'll always say this to any of my clients, is always if we can have one clear week at least, or even two would be ideal, then at least we know that what we've worked out from the calculations in the previous videos is correct. So if you've hit the numbers, you've done the workouts that you've said you could do bare minimum, and then you get the results, the data says so, be it weight drop, you look leaner, measurement drop, etc., then we know what we've worked out is correct. So once you know it's correct, then you can play around with it. So if we start off with calorie cycling, for example, so if you're working out 4 times a week and you worked out that 2,000 calories was going to put you in a weekly average of 14,000 calories, and that gave you your deficit to get you results. Now you have a good clear week, you're having a weekend that you're chilled out, doing nothing, no plans with friends, no social, you stick to it, great. You've managed to get the results your week and you've had a consistent calories across the board. But what say if you've got, you're going out with friends and you wanted to have a couple of drinks. Now, yes, we could get picky and say that, drinks aren't going to be the most optimum thing. They're empty calories. It's not going to give you much nutrient value. But let's be realistic. We're not robots and you want to have a life. So being able to factor this in, again, if you refer back to the macro video where we talk about, say, for example, alcohol is 7 calories per gram, then you might also have carbs or sugars in it if you are choosing other drinks. It's all about making choices and making a degree of sacrifice or control, but equally giving yourself some leeway. So doing the calorie cycle method will give you that leeway. So for example, if we knew that 2,000 daily gave us that deficit and it gave us the 14,000 weekly average, we could then look to bring down the calories and therefore the macros Monday to Friday to 1,800. So you look at it like you've almost got savings, you're banking calories. So you're banking 200 calories per day, Monday to Friday, because it's a nice solid routine, you're at work, it's easy to conform to it, you have less temptations, you can even drop that 200 quite easily. Now what you've therefore then done is you've saved yourself 1,000 calories. Now, let's say you want to go out with friends and you want to have a few drinks. Now, rather than choosing the most calorific, cocktails or even beers or ciders where they could be totting up a lot more calories and carbs and sugars, then you could go for smarter options. So you could have a bit of a longer evening being out and about with your friends. Maybe you're only choosing gin and slimline tonic or something similar where the calories are only sub 100. Now, if you then have banked up the 1,000 calories from Monday to Friday and you just whack them all on Saturday, you eat your normal food to the equivalent of 2,000, but you've got 1,000 calories to play with. Basically, that could be anything. So even if it was alcohol. So let's say, again, I wouldn't really recommend this, but this is just telling you the logic. Imagine if, let's round it up to make life easy, that a gin and slimline tonic was 100 calories. It is actually a bit less. Then in theory, with that extra 1,000 calories you've got on the Saturday, you could have 10 gin and slimline tonics. But again, it's like I said, it's not really the best way to do it, but giving yourself a little bit of leeway, and if it's food related as well, then you've got a bit of leeway on the food, etc. But as long as you're aware and you've got a degree of sacrifice, but not complete I'm a hermit sacrifice that you're not letting yourself have anything. Then on the Sunday, we go back to the 2,000 because If you work out the average, all we've done is taken all those 200 calories there, put them on the Saturday, and then the Sunday's no different. So then the weekly average still works out at 14,000. So then you've still actually got your weekly deficit. The difference is it all depends on when you would be doing your weigh-ins and your checks. So again, with clients, I always have a set day with them. They choose it what suits so they can adhere to it. But what you've then got is, let's say your check-in was a Sunday. It's very likely your results are going to be a bit skew-if. But if you've done the work and you've worked it all out properly, then even though the results might be a little bit skew-if, a little bit like, think of it a bit hazy, a bit biased because of what's happened literally the night before. You could be retaining water. You could be obviously a little bit inflamed from the fact that you've got inflammatory, response from alcohol. There could be many things why it might be masking what actual progress has been made. Whereas if you then cracked on with a normal week for maybe the week after, it would level out. And then that next check-in on the next Sunday, because you haven't had a big outing the Saturday night, would be a really good result potentially on that next check-in. So this is where people go wrong. They might just see the short term and not really look at all the variables that have made that check-in not as good. So regardless if you're checking in with someone or not, again, if you did it all yourself and you didn't have a coach, you need to understand that there is a degree of measurement if you really want to get the best results in the shortest amount of time. Going in blind and just doing it willy-nilly is never going to get you to that position you really want to be in the quickest time and the most accurate way of doing it. You might fluke it, but generally that's normally going to come from the fact that you've over-restricted, massively did too much activity, and then you get there in the end, but is it sustainable? No. I'm a big believer in making this sustainable and learning and understanding this process so you can very much make it a part of your lifestyle and make life a lot easier for yourself while still getting results, but still having a life, for example, if you needed to. Now, I have had people with me before that have done this almost every weekend. It will get so far. It's only when you get to lower body fat levels or really taking your body to places it hasn't been before and it doesn't really want to go, is that where this method will start to not always work for you. Because again, if you've got more variables potentially pulling you different directions and affecting it, because again, we're never going to be 100% accurate with all our tracking and everything we do. It can be one of those sort of things where it can just slow the progress down to almost a stop because of these methods. So in the early days when you're trying to get to adherence, get to routine, these methods will work if you're getting the maths right. But when you get down to lower digits and better performance and better results than you've ever got, it is likely that you're not going to get away with this every week. So again, if this is more of a once in a blue moon, you would probably notice your habit change would have changed anyway. It's more than likely you're not going to be a person drinking all week or drinking every weekend to get the results you want. But again, it's not saying that you don't get to have a drink ever in your future to have a good body. So again, it's just balance, and it's finding the time where you have enough dedication to apply this method generally, but when you really want to knuckle down and get the mind-blowing results that you see, that might be the time when you've more than likely got less things going on, that they're less of a distraction to get to that point, to be those mind-blowing results, maintain that mind-blowing results, and then you can go back to having very much a normality while maintaining that physique you've always dreamed of. So that gives you an idea of calorie cycling. Now, the other part of what you can do with your diet is also called carb cycling. Again, you might have seen this. You could go, if you've got weight to lose, if you're struggling, if making it too complicated is too much, sticking with the same calories, same macros is the easiest way to do this, okay? The next way, like I've already said, is calorie cycling and incorporating the calorie element of it, because that is the primary rule of fat loss and weight loss. Now, if you absolutely screwed up your carbs and your fat intake that you've calculated, but it still equaled the calories, then technically you would still get somewhere. Now we're looking in at the 1% marks, so when people ask, what are the best supplements, how should I do this? How should I do that? If they're little things that are very marginal, if you haven't even nailed basics of consistency, weight training, routine, and getting your food right, then going into more detail is going to be less important 1% markers that are going to get you those little edge of results. But if you've nailed the basics, then going into carb cycling is definitely something that could be beneficial. So the theory behind carb cycling is obviously carbs are great for energy, great for performance. So if you have a better ability to perform and work harder in the gym because you've got more energy, you've got more carbs, then you're likely to push yourself harder, get a greater breakdown in tissue, greater adaptation, and greater overall response over your week from a fat loss perspective, for example, or muscle building. Whereas obviously if you have lower fat, again, you still need fat, but in a sort of preference or priority around a training day, carbs would take preference for being a higher priority than fats would on a training day. Whereas on a non-training day, when you're not as active, you don't need as much muscle glycogen, as much energy. So why would you need as many carbs when, again, you could really look to tap into that lipolysis, so fat burn a little bit more with that 1%, by upping the fats and dropping the carbs a little bit, again, because it changes what about insulin and everything else. Again, this is a lot more detail than I really probably need to go into. So when we look at it like this, if we've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were training days, we could go higher carbs, being 200 grams a day. Again, I've just done this as a general. It doesn't suit everyone. Your numbers are worked out individually. But you had 200 grams of carbs on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday. But on the other days, the non-training days, you only have 100. Now, I like to think of it like your carbs and your fats work in a seesaw. So if you have higher carbs, you're going to have lower fats. If you have lower carbs, you're going to have higher fats. Generally, they're more or less going to make you around about the same on the calorie front, because protein always stays the same. So if it made us around that 2000, manipulating the carbs and the fats, and the protein's still the same, then the overall calories are going to roughly be the same. Again, you might have a little bit less calories on a non-training day, but normally for most people it's not going to be huge. Just to digress on that, the reason that is because obviously if you have a massively low day on calories, but you're still recovering, you still need food on your rest day, then it's more likely you're going to screw up if you're too low a calorie. So having them around about the same is going to be about right. Now, to go back to what I was saying, you've got the 100 gram on the carbs, 100 grams, 100 grams, 100 grams, right? But then you've got increased fats. So instead of 55 gram fats, let's say we've got 100 gram fats. So they're 100 and 100 effectively. Now, when we look at the equations from the macro video, remember that 1 gram of protein or carbs is 4 calories and the fats is 9. So if we've got 55 grams of fat, which is times 9 for 9 calories, and 200 grams of carbs, and that's 4 calories, that gives us a total of those two macronutrients together, 1,295. So hopefully you're still with me so far. That's, say, your training day. On your non-training day, you've got a lot less carbs, but you've got more fats. So again, 100 times 9 and 100 times 4 gives us just about 1,300. So it's 5 calorie difference. So you can see those 2 days, even though the split of carbs and fats are completely different on the 2 days, the overall calorie requirement for those macros is about the same. So when you then apply that, let's say you're having roughly 700 calories from protein, that's probably not even correct. But if that made us the 2,000, then we would be carb cycling, but not calorie cycling if it was 2,000 across the board, okay? So all that does is, like I said, is optimizes training, helps a little bit with lipolysis on the non-training day, and again, just doesn't have excess energy, unnecessary energy that isn't going to be burned off from muscle glycogen when you're not training. So when you apply the two methods, you can actually get even more out of it. So again, you might, for example, really like this approach, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you're going out on a bender or anything on the Saturday. It could even start to get even more advanced stuff, is you could have a lot more calories on your leg days or your muscle groups that you want to build more tissue on, for example, if you were looking to build tissue, and you might have less calories and less carbs on your days where you're not so fussed about growing or improving that area. Let's say it's a weak area, for example. So anything that requires a lot more energy, like leg days, might be smarter to have more calories and more carbs on. Whereas if you were these people that do like an arm day, why the hell would you need as many carbs on an arm day as you do on a leg day? So this is where the even further step on this is, if you were carb cycling and calorie cycling, but it was in relation to training rather than a bender on the weekend, then you're going to optimize your training even more than if you were just doing it for a bender on the weekend. So then your results could be, again, adding up more 1% to make your progress even quicker. So if you really wanted that 12-week sort of transformation, then this is where you start to look at, you know, these small variables that will make your results that much more mind-blowing, because you've covered more 1%. But again, it all comes down to the overlying rules, technically, adherence and consistency along the lines of your training and your calories and your protein. If those main things are sorted, then you can start to look at all of this. Anyway, I hope that's a lot of help, and I hope the graphs that I've put together basically help explain a little bit more. But if you've got any questions, by all means, just ask.